Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to our Bulldogs Behind the Scenes webinar featuring guests from the Cyclists of the Gitchee shores, or more commonly known as COGGS. Feel free to type your name, grad year if you're an alum of UMD, and where you are tuning in from under the comment section using the chat box on the bottom of the screen. So today's webinar is hosted by our office, UMD Alumni Relations, with my teammates Matt and Austin on the call. My name is Molly Nelson, and I will be facilitating our conversation with Cindy and Waylon today. Before we begin, I have a few items to mention. First, we are using Zoom as our platform, and with that are using some features that will help us engage with one another. The main feature is using the question and answer portion of the webinar. If you'd like to, feel free to enter a question in the Q&A section on the bottom of the screen, and Waylon and Cindy will try to answer as many of them as time permits at the end of the session. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our UMD Alumni Relations YouTube page. We will send you a link directly once that is done. So today we have the pleasure of hearing from COGGS leadership about the trail system in Duluth and the future direction of the organization. Our guest speakers are Cindy Wiley and Waylon Munch. Cindy is the current COGGS membership director, where for a year and a half she's been helping people connect to the trails in Duluth. She moved to Duluth in April 2017, where she immediately got involved with COGGS by participating in weekly ladies' rides, the gala committee, as well as the newly created social committee. Cindy has enjoyed connecting Duluthians with the world-class trails in their backyard, as well as other members, with the goal of building an inclusive, sustainable bike community. While she isn't out on the COGGS trails, you can find her paddling on one of the many local lakes, hiking the Superior Hiking Trail, or enjoying the lake walk. Waylon attended UMD from 2007 to 2012 and spent most of his free time exploring the outdoors in and around Duluth. Upon graduating, he was able to find an engineering job in Duluth and then got to work establishing roots in the community. He served on the COGGS Board of Directors from 2013 to 2018 and still stays involved with volunteer trail construction and maintenance. He has loved watching the outdoors community grow in recent years and is excited to see Duluth become a more and more attractive place to live and work. So I will now hand it over to Cindy and Waylon.
Thank you, Molly, and welcome everyone. Waylon and I are excited to be with you this afternoon to talk about COGGS and the single track in town. We're going to get started today with a tour of the fun and flowy Lester River Trail. It's located in our Lester Park. While we go through this tour, I'm going to give you a little bit of history about COGGS itself. COGGS was started by a small group of mountain bikers back in 1994 with a simple goal of building single track in the Twin Ports, both Duluth and Superior. Now we're 25 years removed from that, and we've got almost 90 miles of multi-use single track trail within our city limits here in Duluth. Our mission as an organization is to develop and maintain world-class mountain biking opportunities for all in the Twin Ports. This mission, it's really allowed us to be recognized as a world-class biking center. We are recognized as one of 6 worldwide IMBA Gold Ride centers. This is just due to all of the wonderful trails we have in city limits and the effort we've put into making wonderful trails. COGGS is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are entirely run by volunteers. So in 2019 alone, we logged nearly 5,000 volunteer hours. I know some people had some questions at registration about how they can get involved. Our volunteers are our board of directors. They are our trail crew. They are committees doing our gala planning, which is our biggest fundraiser. Really, there's many ways to get involved. It's really exciting to see all these people willing to spend their time to make great outdoor experiences for everybody, local and tourists. So I hope you guys are enjoying this ride on the Lester River DT. It is a beautiful trail. It goes right along the Lester River, so you can see the river and waterfalls. So one of the most exciting projects that COGGS has gotten to work on is the Duluth Traverse Trail, which you can see here. It connects the furthest west end of town to the furthest east and allows many of our residents to access green space within multiple different neighborhoods. So we're going to get into how the trails are built.
Thanks, Cindy. So COGGS kind of has two primary methods when we talk about trail construction. And here we're looking at the more traditional method. This is just volunteers gathering on weeknights or weekends and cutting in a trail kind of the old-fashioned way with hand tools. And looking here, we have kind of the more modern, the more new school approach to trail construction. So this is a professional trail building contractor that was hired by COGGS working on a section of trail right below Enger Tower. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into both of these methods, and we'll start by taking a look at this more modern approach. So typically when we're trying to build a more beginner-friendly trail, we opt for these professional trail crews with the larger machinery. And the idea here is that, Duluth has some pretty harsh terrain and rugged topography. And when we utilize some of this heavy equipment, it really lets the trail builders sort of manipulate the landscape and sculpt that wider, smoother path through the woods that'll be more inviting for beginning riders. So here we're actually watching a crew work right on UMD's campus through Bagley Nature Area, where there's a new section of trail going in. And we see them operating these power wheelbarrows called candycoms. And what we're doing here is just trying to transport material around as efficiently as possible. It could be dirt, it could be rocks. We're trying to sort of create high points and low points in the trail that essentially serve to keep water from pooling up all across the trail. You'll see this material piled up for things like banked corners. You'll see it on various jumps and rollers and other trail features. And here's our crew back here below Enger Tower with a really nice view from the office on their Monday afternoon.
So here the trail crew is raking off that top layer of dirt. The goal here is to eliminate debris from that trail path because we really want to start with a clean dirt surface. So once the trail is routed and free of debris, the trail crew will come back through and compact the soil. As Waylon mentioned, this is one of our paid trail crews using a power compactor, which is really just a vibrating plate. This can also be done by hand, as you saw in one of the earlier clips. And the goal is to end with a trail surface that is hard and stable. This crew is also working on the new craft connector right below Enger Tower. When crews are building, they're always looking for that perfect rock to add some fun and excitement to the trail. And if they can't find that perfect rock, you end up playing a little bit of rock Tetris like this guy here. He's working on what we call a B-line. This is an optional line for more advanced riders. Just add some excitement, but if you are a little bit beginner, you can ride right past it alongside and avoid the obstacle.
So we've got an abundance of bridges all across our trails in Duluth. There are so many different streams and waterways that cascade down our favorite city on the hill. And this crew's back at UMD. We are, just for reference, we're standing right behind Junction Apartments here when we're building this bridge. And as you can see, this is, again, a beginner level trail, and we keep these bridges to 4 feet wide on our beginner level trails to make sure there's plenty of room to maneuver, very, again, beginner and user friendly. Here's just a look at kind of the finished product when we have these pro trail crews work. So you see several of the elements we talked about. You see that high banked corner. You see the smoother, wider trail surface. You see the optional rock feature sort of near the top of the screen. This section of trail is right below the Lake Superior Zoo and it's been really popular.
So up until now, we've kind of shown you a lot of trail building by our paid trail builders. Now we're going to kind of dive into that backbone of COGGS trails, which is the hand-built trails. This crew is the Minnesota Conservation Corps, and they are doing what we call bench cutting. So they're cutting brand new trail. As I mentioned, COGGS is 100% volunteer run, and a lot of those volunteer hours are spent building and maintaining trail by hand. We have a lot of local businesses that are spending time on the trails. We have weekly trail build days, and it's really a great way to engage with our community. So this is Kim. He's one of our volunteers. He's using a minimalist trail building technique. So he's just scraping that top layer of dirt off, which allows the landscape to dictate the trail. It leaves roots behind, some of those smaller rocks, and it's a great option for more advanced, rugged trails. So as I mentioned, trail crews are always looking for that perfect rock. This volunteer crew here is working at Ely's Peak on another new trail system. They found that perfect rock but needed it to move, so using a sling, they can team lift it and get it right where they want it to be. Trail work is definitely not easy work, but one of the perks is once you get that last rock in place, if you brought your bike, you get to ride out that new feature that you built to see how it rides. So as I mentioned, this is at Ely's Peak and is going to be a more advanced trail completed.
All right, and I would say the final component to sort of the COGGS trail operations is a lot of the seasonal maintenance that occurs every year through our Adopt a Trail program. So midsummer, this time of year, all of our trails start to disappear under a thick blanket of brush and ferns, and we have volunteers out every day keeping things open and clear, doing a variety of other tasks like bridge repair, putting up maps and signs, and just keeping our trails in tip-top shape. So our next step here, we're going to take a quick virtual tour of our trail system. And we see on our map here, the City of Duluth is about 26 miles long and only about 2.5 miles wide. So it's really uniquely set up to have these trails that can kind of pull the whole community together. And as we all know, Duluth has its iconic beautiful ridge line. There's so much green space in this town where it's just this perfect storm and this perfect opportunity for something like the Duluth Traverse to really come to fruition. So on our tour here, we're going to take a look at our 5 different, we call them trail clusters or trail systems that are at various parks throughout town, and then we'll look at how they're all connected. So we're going to start on the west side of town at Mission Creek Trails. So we are way out in Fond du Lac here. This is about as far west as you can go in Duluth. And this area, it's not on a lot of people's radar being as remote as it is, but it is truly a hidden gem in Duluth. And it's not so much the iconic rugged Duluth that we're all familiar with, but it's more this vast open forest with plenty of space to create a network of 23 miles of trails that are very beginner friendly. A lot of times we get asked the question, which trails would you recommend for a beginner or a family to go explore for the first time? And the answer is often we'll point you to Mission Creek. So next up on our tour, we're going to shift east and check out Spirit Mountain. So Spirit Mountain started in 2012 constructing some downhill mountain bike trails, and shortly after that became the first ever chairlift assisted bike park in the Midwest, and it's become very popular not only in Duluth but all across the region. And what Spirit Mountain has done a great job of adding a lot of variety to their trails. So in this picture we see maybe what you think of with a downhill mountain biker, very advanced technical riding. But then here we see quite the contrast to that. We see a young rider, very new to mountain biking, who is still riding downhill at a mountain bike park. So Spirit Mountain has created everything from this truly beginner experience to, the most rugged, rocky terrain that we can find in Duluth, and they've really captured it all in their bike park. Our third stop here, we are headed to the Piedmont Trails and Brewer Park. Are perched kind of right up on top of the hillside, right in the middle of Duluth. And we like to consider these trails as sort of the playground of sorts. This is where our crews have gotten really creative with using the landscape to our advantage and creating this network of intermediate to very advanced level trails. So you see some interesting rock and wood features like we saw in the previous picture, and more often than not, you'll just see these trails that sort of crawl up, over, and around this exposed bedrock that makes the Duluth mountain bike experience truly unique. This is something that you cannot replicate a lot of places around the Midwest, and COGGS and Duluth have really tried to capitalize on that unique factor that we have.
Awesome. As we head further east, our next stop is Hartley Park. This is the trail center that's going to be closest to IMBA, which is now connected by our new Bagley Trail. The ribbon cutting ceremony is scheduled for September 8th, but keep your eyes out for early opening, fingers crossed. Hartley has more traditional trails with a little bit of rocky and rooty trails, and this is showing you the Pines here, which to me is a pretty iconic spot in Hartley. Though it's more traditional, there is fun for the whole family. Fat biking has actually become very popular in the last few years, allowing people to ride year-round. Hartley is one of the more popular fat biking locations in our trail systems, and we do groom the trails during the winter months. It's just a great way to avoid cabin fever in those dark, cold days. So next, we're going to head over to our furthest east trail system, and this is Lester Park. This is where we started our tour today. Lester Park is one of those popular neighborhood trail systems. It's personally my favorite because it allows me to go out for a ride without having to drive across town. The Lester River Trail is the last section of the Duluth Traverse. You're constantly riding between the Lester River and Amity Creek, which, as I mentioned earlier, gives you beautiful views of the river and waterfall. And it's actually a really fun place to take a dip on a hot day. Hawks Ridge here is one of the few intermediate sections on the DT itself. It's rocky, it's right along the ridgeline, and gives you beautiful views of the lake.
All right, and finally, we've been talking about the Duluth Traverse the whole time, and it's shown here on the map highlighted in red. And the Duluth Traverse is really kind of that singular spine trail that links the entire community together. And a lot of times we view it as more than just a bike trail. It is really a community centerpiece. And this trail is passing through all the trail systems we just showed you. It's passing through 16 different neighborhoods in Duluth. It's going through a variety of other parks and recreation areas. It is truly meant as kind of a community gateway to help people get outside. So I'll just show you a few scenes from along the trail to give you an idea of what it's like out there and showcase how we're using Duluth's amazing landscape to our advantage. So this is a segment just below Enger Park along some cliff faces. Here we are out in West Duluth, passing through an old railroad tunnel under Ely's Peak. This whole railroad corridor was just rehabilitated by the City of Duluth for future use as a public trail, and it's going to be a great asset to the city. And lastly, you know, there are more views along these trails than I can even try to count, but here's one of the best. This is, again, the Hawk Ridge Trail, right above the lakeside neighborhood, overlooking the greatest lake in the whole world. And we're so proud that we have this asset in our community. We're so excited that we get to share it with people, and we would encourage anybody to dust off their bike if it hasn't been ridden for a while and head out and explore. You will find a lot of really interesting things right in your own backyard.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Cindy and Waylon, for that tour. Now is the time. We're going to transition to our question and answer section of the webinar. And we did ask a few questions in advance through our registration form. However, now is the time to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you would like to ask a question. So our first question asks, what have the trends of tourists versus locals using the trail system, and how do future plans relate to that?
You want to take that one, Waylon?
Yeah, I can try to take that one. So when we set out building this trail, we really had sort of kind of a multifaceted approach. We wanted this to be something that would draw people into Duluth and make people excited about Duluth and sell that tourism component. But we really wanted to lean on the fact that this is for the community that lives here. And Duluth has almost 100,000 people living right here, and the goal was that anybody who lives in Duluth should live no more than about 5 minutes from a trail. So as far as our, how we're reaching folks, I would say it's definitely been geared towards the community, but we're not shying away from the fact that we want people to come to Duluth and explore these trails. And the second half of that question, just taking a look at how it's shaping the future plans. As the trail system is built out, we're finding more and more people within the community who want to get outside and explore. We're starting to look at more community connector trails that can be built to just make sure that we're really delivering on that promise that everybody who lives in Duluth has the opportunity to get right out on a trail. No matter which neighborhood you live in, which street you live on, you will have that sort of right out your back door access.
So then as a follow-up to that question, as far as access goes, what would you say is the type of skill level to be able to ride some of these trails?
So really we have trails that cover all skill levels. The Duluth Traverse, if you ever look at any of the maps that use the green, blue, black rating, A majority of the Duluth Traverse is a green beginner trail. I had mentioned that Hawk Ridge is an intermediate section, so it is a little bit more technical, but it is a great spot to kind of progress your skills. And honestly, there's a lot of spots on there when I first started riding on it that I was walking because I wasn't quite confident enough. So that's one thing is we have pieces of trail for every skill level. I know one thing we're working on is a skills park, which Waylon himself is actually kind of heading up that project, which will be great for kids and beginners and really fine-tuning those skills. So yeah, I would say we've got trails for everybody, and you just have to be aware of what your limitations are, and don't be afraid to walk it and be out and have fun.
So you did mention during the presentation about the new development up at Bagley and UMD, and you had mentioned that the grand opening was in September. Is that when the trails will be open?
So that is the plan right now. That is when the ribbon cutting ceremony is scheduled. That trail is very, very, very close to being completed. There are just a couple minor, I will call them administrative things that we need to tidy up before we can actually open it. So we are hopeful that we can open that before the ribbon cutting. So really just keep a close eye on our Facebook page and Twitter feeds to know when that'll open.
All right, we just had a question come in about bike etiquette. The question says, the Duluth Traverse is supposed to be a multi-use trail. However, I've almost been hit by a mountain biker several times while walking. What is the proper mountain bike etiquette on a multi-use trail? And how do I make myself safer when walking on the trail?
I can jump in there. So with multi-use trails and etiquette, there's a couple of points that we make. The first one is when two trail users, if it's a biker approaching a hiker or two bikers approaching each other, the general rule is that whoever is traveling uphill has the right of way. And in Duluth, that's fairly common. You're almost always on a hill of some sort. So rule number one is that uphill, if it's a walker, if it's a rider, whoever's moving uphill has the right of way. So if you're heading downhill, you should be yielding. And the other rule that you'll see on a lot of our trail signs at trailheads or at road crossings, if it is a flat area where there's no obvious who has the right of way, the mountain bikes yield to foot traffic. And every situation is unique and different depending on how you make that approach. I've seen some where hikers have yielded. I've yielded plenty of times as a biker. But really what we're trying to push moving forward is a lot more on this user etiquette and just the reminder to everybody that these are multi-use trails. So nobody is wrong if they're on foot, if they're on a bike, if they have a leash dog with them. These trails are for everybody, and we're continuing to push that message out.
Perfect. Another question about kind of different aspects along the trail. Are there plans to include campsites along the trail at all?
So I don't know a lot about it, but as far as I know, that is something that is determined by the city. We work very closely with the City of Duluth to build these trails, and we have to submit plans for all of them that they have to approve. And as far as I know, camping is not allowed within city limits. So I don't know. Waylon, do you know any more about that one?
No, there's been nothing on my radar, and you nailed it, Cindy, as far as, plans to include future amenities like camping. Definitely go through the City of Duluth Parks Department to incorporate into larger parks planning.
And actually on that note, I do know that up at UMD Bagley, there is a campsite in town. I believe there's a handful of them. And so you can just rent that through the rec sports and outdoor program directly from UMD. So just to mention that as far as camping. Okay, well, it looks like we have a question about the Mission Creek. So are there plans to link Mission and Spirit with the trail, and what is the timing and where will it go?
Sure, I can take that one. So that one picture we showed of the Ely's Peak Tunnel, that will become sort of the designated Duluth Traverse route that connects Mission Creek from the from the Becks Road trailhead to the Spirit Mountain Chalet. So that old railroad grade it's existed kind of largely unknown for many years now, and just in the last probably 2 or 3 years, the city has started to rehabilitate it. There were 2 very old trestle bridges that got rebuilt, and more recently the tunnel that we saw was cleared of any rockfall hazards. And there's a little bit more work to do just on the trail surface itself, doing some regrading of the trail. But that trail, which is about, I think, 5 miles from Mission to Spirit, that old railroad grade will become part of the Duluth Traverse route in the near future.
And then, are there plans to extend the trails to Two Harbors and Split Rock?
Not that I am aware of. Do you know anything, Waylon?
So, Two Harbors has formed a club, or I should say Lake County has formed a club that is working on trail development in and around Two Harbors and another trail system up near Split Rock State Park. As far as doing connections between the two, that hasn't really been a point of discussion, but I like to say not yet, because as enthusiasm around mountain biking continues to grow, I definitely love the idea of big picture planning and thinking. So I'll say no, but I certainly hope it does become a topic in the future. It would be great to see a North Shore mountain bike trail.
Then we did have a question about funding, and what type of funding does COGGS rely on, and how can the public help in the fundraising during the pandemic?
So we rely very heavily on donations. We do our big fundraiser every March called the Gala, which we actually didn't get to have this year because of the wonderful pandemic. But it's where we do a live auction, silent auction, and we raise our largest amount of money for the year. We also do have some smaller events where we partner with Spirit for the Kraus Anderson Bike Duluth Festival. Individual donations are very helpful. We have our memberships are also helpful. We have grants that we can apply for. That's something that we haven't maybe done the best at reaching out and finding in the past, but we're looking to take advantage of those more here in the future, especially for some specific projects that might be focused more towards kids or specific trail development. So, if you feel like you want to help support COGGS, there is a donation link on our website that you can access and just donate money whenever you have the ability to, or you can sign up for a membership. We have multiple different membership options for individuals, families, students as well, that can either be a one-time payment or you can set it up to recur every year so you don't have to remember.
So that actually transitions nicely into this next question. Are there any fees required to use the trails?
So there are not fees required to use the trails. They're there as an asset and wonderful green space in our community, so there are no trail use fees.
Another question about recommendations for a newer rider. Sometimes this person gets a little bit nervous on tight trails with different trees. I'm wondering if you have a recommendation for a wider trail to explore as a first timer.
Yeah, I will lean on what I mentioned earlier about the Mission Creek Trail system. The Mission Creek trails have several very beginner-friendly trails. The two that I would point you to would be the St. Louis River Trail, which is a very wide beginner-friendly trail with also a few great views of the St. Louis River. And the second one would be called Upper Cathedral. And those two trails together form a pretty nice loop that's about 6 miles long.
All right. This next question wonders, are there places to rent bikes in Duluth if you're visiting?
There are a lot of options. I know in the past, I don't know if they're doing it this year, but UMD has bike rental options. All of the local bike shops, as far as I know, have done bike rentals in the past. I don't know if this year if they are doing that just because of the coronavirus. But yeah, Continental, Ski Hut, all do rentals.
Now I actually have a question. Knowing that biking is pretty social, are there any sort of group rides that are still happening?
So we don't have anything scheduled for this summer right now. We did just put a new ride director in place, so I do see that picking up as the summer kind of comes to an end, hopefully. We did get the okay to restart our Enduro series. So this is kind of a fun race type environment without it really being a race, for those that want to challenge themselves and do an Enduro. And that's actually starting tomorrow, will be our first one for this. So we haven't done a ton of group rides, but I'm hoping that we can get that started up again soon.
Perfect. And then our last question here wants to know, you had mentioned the potential new skills park, and where would that be located?
Yeah, so we have plans well underway to create a skills park. It'll be called Keene Creek Bike Park. So if anybody's familiar with where Keene Creek Dog Park is, essentially think about it as being right underneath the Interstate 35 overpass as I-35 starts to climb up the hill in West Duluth. There's about 2 acres of unused grassy field right underneath that overpass. And our plan is to develop that with a variety of beginner to intermediate all the way up to expert level skills features. So it might be places where you practice riding over skinny wooden bridges for the first time. There might be places to practice jumps, small, medium to large jumps. There might be various rocky features to work on your bike handling. The goal is to make that really a community bike park, something that kids and families can easily get to, being that it's sort of right in the neighborhood and really close to the highway. Expect to see more movement on that coming around in 2021 as our plans start to take a little bit more shape, but we are well underway with getting moving on that. We're very excited for it.
And you know what? We're going to do one more question. Where can folks get the maps, access the maps?
So we don't currently have any maps out in print, but if you get onto either the COGGS website, there should be a link to Trail Forks, and this is where you'll find the most updated trail routes, and even anything new will be on there as well. That's the thing. We build so much trail that it is so hard for us to keep print maps relevant. So Trail Forks is going to be your best option.
Perfect. Well, thanks to our host, Cindy and Waylon, for taking the time to share with us a new perspective on the works of COGGS. Outdoor recreation is certainly a defining characteristic of why many of us chose UMD in Duluth, and it's awesome to see how these experiences are being nurtured. If you have any other questions that weren't answered today, we listed COGGS in our website on this slide, so feel free to reach out with any questions. Also, please keep an eye out for our upcoming Alumni and Friends online learning sessions. Our next program takes us on a tour of the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chaska, Minnesota, and we'll be featuring an emphasis on native plants. So again, a big thanks to Waylon and Cindy, and we hope that you will join us again on future alumni events. Thank you.